Okay, so welcome to the mold inspection class, and we'll go ahead and get started. And anybody who has questions can feel free to ask the questions whenever you're ready. But just like I was gonna say, there's a difference between remediation and rehab. This course covers mold rehab so that you can get a clean house to sell with a clean test for mold. It also covers how to test for mold. If you need formal remediation and a clearance letter, you need to hire a mold remediation company. We do not do mold remediation, okay? We do mold inspection. There's a whole different classification for remediation, all right? So this is not a remediation class. That's something that's different. And the reason why I wanna make sure that you know that's different is because I don't wanna send people into properties to where they think that they're gonna have to dress up in hazmat suits and do all that. Now, I will go over it so that you can pass the test. And you will need to know what a remediator will do so that when you're explaining to people what you know about mold and stuff, then you will know what a remediator would have to do. But this is strictly for inspection. All we wanna do is we wanna end up finding that the property contains mold. And if the property contains mold, then we document what type it is, how many spores per cubic foot it is, and all of this is done by a lab, okay? You're not liable for anything that the lab says. I'm gonna teach you how to collect the sample. So just keep in mind this, it's not the policeman that says that you're speeding. If you ever go and contest a ticket that you got for speeding, then what they do is they end up bringing the policeman up and they say, okay, so what was the ticket for? And they said, you know, doing 100 miles an hour in a 70-mile-an-hour zone. And they go, okay, what ended up prompting you to end up saying that this person was doing that? Well, I ended up using my so-and-so radar gun. And they go, okay, are you certified to calibrate this machine? Yes, I am. Do you have a certificate that shows that you're certified? Yes, I have my certificate. All right, are you up to date on your qualifications? Which anybody like Richard here can come and end up renewing this whenever I get one. Okay, so but what it is they say, okay, so it's not the policeman that says that you were speeding, it's the radar detector gun. And as long as he was qualified to use that piece of equipment and calibrate it, then you're guilty. And it's not him that says it, it's the machine. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna teach you how to use a machine to find mold in any vacant bank-owned property. Now, people always ask me, Pete, why do you end up saying that it's for vacant bank-owned properties? And it's simply because of this. I don't do it to an individual because it will take money out of an individual's pocket, okay? And in the real estate business, even my brother Tony will tell you that we're not out to take advantage of somebody just to end up making money. What we wanna do is we end up getting good deals by solving people's problems, you know, and the money comes. If you help somebody, then the money comes. So if I was to do this to somebody who was living in the home, then it's gonna devalue what they would have to end up giving the discount, or they would have to fix it. And the reason why I do it to vacant bank-owned properties is because they have literally hundreds of properties that Tony ends up telling me about, ghost properties and stuff like that it's not coming out of anybody's pocket, and the bank's there's no value on these houses anymore once they're taken back by the bank. They don't have a mortgage on them, so really what their value is what will an investor give them for this property, okay? So what I do is simply this, here's the formula. I find listed bank-owned properties. I find out what they're asking for them. I end up offering 10% below what they're asking for them. That gets my foot in the door. Then during my 10-day inspection period, I end up going in and doing this mold inspection. inspection test, okay? I send it off to a place called ProLab. ProLab emails me the results back. So what you do is you take the test, you overnight it by FedEx, which I'm gonna show you how that's already pre-set up during this course. You already have pre-made labels and everything. And because since you are a certified person, or actually in the business of doing mold inspection, then if you were to try and do this on your own, and you can find ways to take mold tests, but you send it to ProLab, well, what they do is they charge you $40 to test what you're doing. But that's only $40, so where do they make their money? If you're not in the business, then they sell your name to every mold remediation company there is out there, and then they end up hounding you because they know that you have mold in your house, okay? And so what they do is they make more money off of selling the list of names than they do actually doing the test. But if you're in the business and you're registered with them, then they only turn the results over to you, and they don't sell your name, and they end up giving you there's a barcode on it that says who you are and all that. So that's the advantage of being through one of these classes. So you're going to be able to end up getting a remediation company to give you an estimate on what the repairs would be, and then you're not going to, I'm going to show you in this course what the EPA says is good cleanup products that they will accept to be used to clean the mold, provided that it's not a toxic mold that's over and above the suggested amount of safeness. Then then you're good with just cleaning. So you send one off and it comes back elevated. You end up doing the cleaning process that I'm going to show you afterwards, and then you have a second one that comes back non-elevated. That's the one that you disclose when you sell the property. So one you end up getting that shows that there's molds in the house, toxins, allergens, and bacteria. The second one that you do is after you clean up, that shows that now you have a safe house to sell. And all you have to disclose is the one that says that it's got non-elevated levels of mold, okay? So that's how this works. All right, so what we're gonna cover is introduction to mold, where and why mold grows, finding mold and moisture, general remediation issues, large areas and other special concerns, containment and personal protective equipment, evaluating the remediation, communicating with the occupants, and mold prevention. Okay, so y'all can stop me at any time for a question if you want to, since it's a small class. Otherwise, I would put it to the end. All right, so David knows that molds are found indoors and outdoors. Okay, so if I said, is mold found indoors? The answer would be true, or yes, right? Okay, so is it also found outdoors? Because it says molds are found indoors and outdoors. I don't have to say, is mold found indoors and outdoors? I can ask you one or the other, and either way, mold is found indoors and outdoors. And David knows that. Mold breaks down and digests organic material called fungi or mildew. It multiplies by producing microscopic spores. It floats in the air and is carried by the air, and it lands on something. Once it lands on something, then it will end up using a food source to make it grow. So mold is not a problem indoors unless it lands on a damp spot and grows. So mold will digest anything that it grows on. All right, so that being said, let me end up telling you what you need to be afraid of and what you don't, okay? If you go into a property, and I think that we've all seen something like this, if you walk in and there's mold from floor to ceiling, and it's all over the walls from toes to ceiling, then I'm not worried about that, okay? Because it says that most molds, what they do is they float in the air until they land on something. Once they land on something, if there's a food source like moisture or something that they can eat, then it will grow, okay? Now, toxic molds are too heavy, too wet, too dense to end up flying in the air. They end up only spreading maybe 2 or 3 feet from where they start. So if it's a toxic mold, and this is not 100% guaranteed, this is just a rule of thumb. If it looks like a big dark spot that doesn't seem to have moved or grown, flown up and everything, you can see spots in the ceiling tiles, you can see spots on the walls, you can see growth that come up 2 or 3 feet on the wall and everything. But if it looks like it's wet and heavy, no matter what color it is, then that indicates that it may be a toxic mold, okay? Because toxic molds are wet and heavy, and they normally don't travel through the air, all right? So that's the big difference. That's if you wanted a rule of thumb to where when you walked into a house and you decided, should I be wearing some sort of a mask or cover to come in here, then that should be your first indication. Does it look like it's wet and it doesn't grow, but if it goes all the way up the wall and everything, then that's gonna be just a regular, worst case scenario is you get sniffles and maybe runny eyes or a runny nose if you're subject to having a problem with it.
Quick question.
Yes.
So I know when I think EPA standards, I think like zero, you know, they put the standards high at 0% chance you're gonna have like an issue, right? So
Right.
if you're walking into a house that has toxic mold, what are the odds you actually get some health effects or get sick from it?
You know, I would end up saying about 10% at the most is what has been in my experience. I have only had 4 people in 20 years that I have been doing this that had enough toxic mold in the house that they could not repair it themselves.
Okay.
With a remediation company, okay? So, in other words, it would have to be to where you would have to, they would condemn the property until the mold was removed. Which means that they actually have to tear the stuff out and wrap it up with plastic and all this, which I'll go through and everything. But for the most part, 90% of the properties that I do that have mold in them, I don't even have to wear the hospital type mask as I go in and do it. So this is just a way to where nobody at the bank is trained in mold remediation, and they don't know what molds are bad for you and what mold is not. Everybody thinks that all mold is bad for you, which it probably is in some way, shape, or form. You obviously don't want to purposely get involved with it, but 90% of the time, I mean, think about it. You know, cavemen and women used to end up living in caves, and you know that there's been mold there, and you know. We eat cheese, and cheese is basically mold.
Yes.
So it's I'll end up pointing out to you the things that are bad.
How common is toxic mold?
Not very common. You're gonna run across something that ends up being called Stachybotrys, which is gonna be spelled out for you, and it'll show you how to identify it. But any mold that produces what's called a mycotoxin is a toxic mold, and that normally ends up having the word Stachybotrys in it. But I'm going to tell you the several different types of most common molds. So to grow indoors, mold needs moisture, and David knows that. Moisture is the most important factor in mold growth, but it doesn't need much. Condensation is enough in common sites of bathroom, tile, and grout, basement walls, windows, sinks, leaky sinks, water fountains, and common sources of roof leaks, slow leaks in plumbing, humidification problems, sprinkler systems, and floods. Okay, for those of you who are feverishly trying to get all this, if you want, I'll send you a copy of the presentation. Okay, so that way you don't have to write down everything. You can take the notes that you want to highlight to yourself, but I'll send you a copy of this. Alright, what mold needs to grow, it also needs nutrients. It can grow on virtually any organic substance, which would be paper, cloth, wood, plant material, and soil. Temperature is not normally an issue with mold. We've seen mold in refrigerators, we've seen mold, in the hot sun over 100 degrees. Okay, so, temperature does not have a problem, producing mold, it's not a factor. You see mold in the refrigerator all the time. And that's normally not a toxic mold, normally. Alright, molds produce allergens, irritants, and potentially toxic substances, or chemicals called mycotoxins. Alright? David knows this, mold does not have to be alive to cause an allergic reaction. Mold does not have to be alive to cause an allergic reaction. It can be dead on the wall. It can be just a dust. Okay? Now, the reason why I end up telling you that we want to do air samples, because there's 5 or 6 other ways to sample for mold, like tape, swabs, and all kinds of stuff. But we do it in the air, we do air samples, because what is the most common way that mold spreads is through the air, okay? So if you want to end up making sure that you get a good characteristic of what's in the air in any property, you do an air sample. Now, there's gonna be times that if you look over here by this window over here, how many of you looked and seen in the sunbeams that are coming through millions of particles floating in the air? Okay, those are molds, allergens, toxins, and bacteria. We just don't pay attention to it and don't think about the fact that that's in every bit of the air. It's just we're seeing it because it's got the sunshine on it. But that's throughout every single place that you're walking, okay? So the trick behind this is that every vacant bank-owned property, or the property you live in, the property I live in, no matter what, is gonna test positive for mold. So that's your ringer right there, is it's guaranteed to test positive for several kinds of mold. The trick is that unless you've been to a class like this, you don't know what is gonna cause symptoms and what's not, okay? So you end up putting in an independent laboratory that says this property that this bank is offering for sale has 14 different types of molds, toxins, allergens, and bacteria, and this has been known to cause serious illness and or even death in people that are allergic to it, okay? So then you end up saying, well, now that you've been served this from an independent laboratory, I had a remediation company tell me what it was gonna cost to remediate the mold. Now I'm adjusting my 10% below what you're asking offer exactly less what this remediation estimate is. Okay, so we have people in our RIA group that do mold remediation. They know that only 1 in 10, if that, you're gonna actually use them for mold remediation. Because most of the time, the only people that actually do remediation are ones that, number 1, have a toxic mold that they need to get rid of, or 2, they're afraid, okay? So what we do is, they end up saying that they give free estimates because they're obviously gonna wanna do the work. I guarantee them that if we end up having a toxic mold situation, that we will use their company to do it. But for them to end up giving us the estimates that we need, and they know up front that 90% of the time, we're just gonna clean it, and we're looking for the estimate on what it would cost if we didn't use cleanup type situations, then we pay them $100 for their time, okay? Which is good, because even if you're doing a $30,000 house and you're getting 25% discount on it, it still covers, you know, the cost of what you got to learn how to do this, you know. And think about this, I've had people that I taught this in California, and in California, properties are over $1 million very easily. And I've had people that got over $270,000 off of a property, you know, just based on the fact that it's more expensive out there. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing $20,000 houses or you're doing $2 million houses. I base it, instead of saying, oh, you can make 25 grand off of this, it's basically a percentage off of wherever it is that you're gonna buy. And I base it on this. I do it in the kitchen because the kitchen is the most expensive rehab that you'll do. And so I get an estimate on what it's gonna take to remove and replace all the cabinets, countertops, flooring, and appliances. And that normally ends up being a reasonably big amount, about 25% of what the property value would be that I'm offering. And so that's how I get to what's my offer gonna be. Now, then I end up going and I use the techniques that the EPA says are acceptable to do the cleanup, provided that it's not a toxic mold, okay? So now everybody sees the premise on why you're here today is because it's guaranteed to get you a discount. It's whether they'll give you the 100% discount or whether they're going to end up counter offering you. But once you end up putting the fact that an independent laboratory says that it's got mold, they now have to disclose a copy of that test as well as a copy of the remediation that it's gonna cost to end up repairing it. They have to disclose that to everybody that made an offer before and everybody who makes an offer afterwards. So if they're disclosing that it's got something in there that the bank can be held liable if somebody got sick or ill, then they would just as soon give you the discount than they have to mess with it. Now the good thing about that is once you end up doing a mold property and you buy it, then you end up going back to the bank and saying, okay, now that you know that I'll buy a property with mold and you can't stand to have properties with mold, give me a list of all your properties that have mold in them that you know about, and you know, I'll make offers on them.
If you go to one of these and you go through those steps, maybe you don't have the money up front to purchase it. Is that property, can it take a mortgage or is that frozen because they won't loan on that? And the next question would be, then would the bank look at me as an individual and say, I'm credit worthy, so I'll give you a personal loan and then you buy it that way?
Yes, there's two ways that you can do it. A mortgage company may not want to end up putting a mortgage on it until it has a clearance letter, okay? But somebody like me who does private money, we would obviously end up doing it, especially knowing that you're gonna end up getting a discount on it. And the discount that you get on it, what does a private money lender always want? They want to only loan 65 to 70% of the value after repair value. Okay, so they know if you're gonna get 25% off because it's got mold, then they'll loan you the purchase price, knowing that the after repair value is gonna meet their criteria. So, but the fact that you end up having, you can take a personal loan on something, but probably not a mortgage. Because normally a mortgage company would end up saying you would have to end up having a clearance letter for that. All right, so like I said, David knows that mold does not have to be alive to cause an allergic reaction. Dead mold can cause an allergic reaction. It causes headache, sneezing, runny nose, red eyes, skin rash. It can cause asthma attacks in asthmatics that are allergic to mold. See, everything in here says if people are allergic, if people are prone to problems with it. The average person doesn't get affected by this. They may get, you know, the sniffles, they may get runny eyes, they may get a runny nose. We've all been in houses that we ended up, you know, having minor symptoms like that. But what they're talking about is people that actually are allergic to it. Those are the people that end up having to where you have to worry about whether there's a legal issue of it. And as long as you end up having a letter that says that when you sold or rented the property, that it had a unelevated amount of anything in there, then obviously something that the people did after they moved in allowed this to grow, because you had a clean bill of health for the property as it was rented. Okay, the color of mold does not matter whatsoever. One of you ended up sending me a picture of white mold through Tony. It doesn't matter whether it's white, doesn't matter whether it's black, green, rust colored. I've seen orange mold, anything that you can imagine. Black mold is something that the media made up, okay? Just because it's black doesn't mean that it's toxic, and just because it's toxic doesn't mean that it's black, all right? What makes it toxic is, does it produce a mycotoxin? Because all toxic molds produce mycotoxins. If it does not produce a mycotoxin, it's not a mold, it's not a toxic mold. So David knows if it does not produce a mycotoxin, it's not a toxic mold. So not all molds are toxic, and David knows this. It has to produce a mycotoxin to be considered a toxic mold. Now sometimes when they end up referring to black mold, they're referring to something that's called Stachybotrys chartarum, or any mold that produces mycotoxins. Okay, toxins that produce molds that produce mycotoxins are called toxigenic fungi. All right, so it has pictures of white mold, black mold, and stuff like that. It's exactly like a pepper. All right, everybody in here is familiar with bell peppers. Okay, but what most people don't know is when you see that there's green pepper, green bell peppers, red bell peppers, yellow and orange, it's how long do they stay on the vine, okay? It's the same vine, just like it's the same mold. It's how long has it been on the vine is what color it turns. So the age of the mold depends on what color it is and what it's been feeding off of, okay? So don't ever let the color of mold end up indicating to you any preference on whether you think that it's bad or not. And that's the biggest thing that the media did, is they ended up saying, oh, black mold, black mold, black mold, and so now everybody's afraid of black mold. 90% of the molds you run across are going to be black at some point, and so you can't base it on that. All right, a moldy smell. Anytime that you have a moldy smell, that indicates that you should end up doing some sort of investigation, and David knows that. Okay, they're called MVOCs, microbial volatile organic compounds. They have a strong, unpleasant odor, and they're the source of a musty smell. And David knows that anytime that you have a moldy odor, then it should be investigated, okay? And MVOCs are linked to symptoms like headache, fatigue, dizziness, nasal irritation, and nausea. Okay, now here's the biggest misconception that everybody goes through. According to the EPA, and David knows this, that the use of biocides, which in this case, chlorine bleach, laundry bleach, is not recommended during mold cleanup. So David knows that per the EPA, then you're not supposed to use bleach for mold, okay? Now, let's talk about the real world. And here's how they know that you're gonna use bleach anyway, because what does every mold killing product on the market have in it? Bleach, okay? But the reason why the EPA wants to tell you not to use bleach is because most of the time you mix it with something else, like ammonia or something, and then it becomes to where the fumes are dangerous to you. So the EPA, David knows, will say that you cannot use bleach. Now, everybody in the world now knows that, but if you do use bleach, which we know that you will, okay, then you would not make sure that you don't mix it with any other cleaning solutions. 100% straight bleach is fine, 50-50 bleach and water is fine, okay? But according to the EPA, you're not supposed to use bleach, alright? And I had already told you this, and it's gonna repeat itself over and over again during here. Dead mold is an allergen, okay? Dead mold is still allergen. It's not enough to kill it, you must remove it. Alright, so here's the examples of mold. Stachybotrys is something that produces, trichoethicene, which is a mycotoxin, and it's poisonous by inhalation. So if you have Stachybotrys of any strain whatsoever, then that is a toxic mold. It produces a mycotoxin. Alright, and here's how you end up knowing whether you're being exposed to certain types of mold. If it's a toxic mold, you're gonna end up having flu symptoms, sore throats, diarrhea, headaches, fatigue, your skin's gonna itch, your hair's gonna fall out. This is with long term, you know, if you're living in with it. It ends up suppressing the immune system, it affects your lymph nodes, and it gets into your bones, okay? It also gets into your liver and your kidney. That's why toxic molds are deadly, okay? So if you have a certain amount of this, it's acceptable to clean it, provided that it's not over a certain amount, which we'll get into, alright? So it's not a deal killer to have a toxic mold to where you gotta say, well, I'm not buying that property. If the property has enough in it to where they want to condemn the property, then yes, you walk away from it unless you want the land, okay? So, but other than that, the most common ones that you're gonna have are like aspergillus. Aspergillus is something that it bothers your lungs. If you go into a property and you cough a little bit, you start getting a tickly throat and you cough a little bit, then you're gonna know that basically if it's affecting your lungs and your breathing, a tickly in your throat, a little bit of a cough or you know, a little shortness of breath, then you know that that's aspergillus that's growing up and down the walls. Or you ended up going into a property, and let me end up telling you, only do this on your way out of the property. Never open the refrigerator in an abandoned property until you're ready to leave. It's always the last thing that you do, because when you have a bank-owned property, the first thing that they do is they turn off the electricity so that it's not costing them money. So if somebody has not emptied the refrigerator out, then if the first thing that you do when you're walking through during your inspection, you open up the refrigerator and this smell comes out, then the rest of the time that you're in that house, you're smelling that putrid smell. So I always teach people, don't ever open the refrigerator until it's the last thing you do, because then if it's got something in it that has spoiled, then you don't have to smell it the whole time that you're doing your inspection. So that's one of your best tips today and everything. So aspergillus is basically something that ends up bothering you in your lungs or coughing. Cladosporium, those are causative agents that cause itching skin, give you a little bit of a red rash, but your eyes are gonna water, okay? When your eyes start watering and you start getting a runny nose, then that's going to end up telling you that you've got cladosporium that you're messing around with. Now, keep in mind that for every one of these 4 things, there's probably 100 different strains of each one of these, but this is just the basic name of it. Curvularia, that ends up getting in your eyes, makes it definitely to where your eyes are watering the whole time, your eyes will burn and stuff like that. So these are some of the examples of mold that you have, and so we've gone through the first of the 9 modules. Alright, mold can grow on any organic substance. As long as moisture and oxygen are present, then you will have mold, okay? Moisture, and David knows that moisture is the most common cause of mold. wood, paper, carpet, food, and insulation are things that mold can grow on. Alright, now keep in mind, if you've seen mold in insulation, it can't grow on the fiberglass insulation because it can't eat it. But if there's paper on the back of it, that's how you see it in insulation, because it's growing off the paper and it just happens to spread somewhat into the insulation. Anytime that you end up seeing something like that, wood, paper, carpet, I've seen it on countertops and even tables tops like this. It can't grow on this because it can't eat on it, but that means that there's something on it, like a food source, like dirt or some sort of sugary something, somebody ate something on the countertop, and it's growing off of that. Okay, so a lot of times, man, there's aspergillus. So, in other words, a lot of times, then just a Clorox wipe or whatever those disinfecting wipes that you end up buying and just pull out is good enough to end up wiping down a lot of your stuff with. And that's gonna be one of the cleaning products that's approved for all this. You control mold growth by controlling indoor moisture. Then it's got a picture of a sandwich in there, and it ends up showing you basically the different types of mold growth that you can have, and that it's refrigerated and stuff like that. Moisture problems in buildings are linked to changes in construction practices. Delayed maintenance can lead to moisture and mold problems. So leaking roofs, leaking or condensing water pipes on the inside of walls can do it. Leaking fire protection, sprinkler systems, landscaping can make water come into the house and cause mold. Gutters and downspouts that don't have the water taken over 4 feet away from the house. I always end up getting people to come, even if I'm not replacing the gutters and downspouts, then I will have on the downspout something that they end up having a 4-foot section and it's got wings on it, and they end up putting a screw in here, a little bitty screw in here, a little bitty screw in here at the end of the downspouts if they don't already have this. If you have new gutters and downspouts, request this. And what it is that they're 4 feet long, they have a screw on one side and a screw on the other, and you can lift it up so that when you mow the grass and stuff like that, it's out of your way. And then you put this back down after you mow the grass. It takes the water 4 feet away from the house, which means that unless you have a torrential downpour, you're gonna have the water far away enough from the house that it does not soak and start to get into the house. So how many of you seen these downspouts that I'm talking about that have this extra 4 feet on it? And if you haven't, then I'll show you a picture during one of the breaks. All right. So high humidity can end up causing problems. I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but I know people that during the winter, they end up pulling the tube from their clothes dryer out from the wall, which blows the damp air out and stuff, and they put it down onto the floor behind their dryer, and every time that they end up doing laundry, then they blow that warm damp air into the house to warm the house, especially if they have a 2-story house. Okay, and what they're thinking is that it warms the downstairs, and then hot air rises, so and they think, well, it'll keep down my heating cost and it'll keep everything warm. But what you're doing is you're blowing warm damp air, and it's going to end up getting to where it actually causes condensation on something, and if it's got a food source, it'll grow. All right, so the other thing is anytime that you end up looking at a property and you want to end up seeing if there's visible mold, look above the stove in the cabinets above the stove, because what people do on the stove, they boil things and the steam goes straight up. So if you open up those cabinets that are above the stove, then that's gonna end up being a place that you can, if you wanna see visible mold, you'll normally see visible mold in those cabinets because of what rises. Okay, now look at this picture that's right here. Do you see how this is very, very, what would look wet, and it's not climbing the walls? It only goes about 2 feet one way and about 2 feet the other, because it's growing on itself, but it can't float in the air. So that is my example of, I would consider that to be a toxic mold. When you see something like that, then that's something that you would end up hitting. The first thing is to end up knocking that stuff down. And there's gonna be something, I've got I cut the label off of it because they don't allow me to.
You're not charging.
Okay, at some point, we'll have to unplug the top of it and plug it back in.
You wanna go good?
Yeah, please. Just to make sure that the green light comes back on. And, so that, that right there is basically what I would end up hitting with something called Mediclean. Mediclean, Mediclean. Mediclean used to be called Shockwave, and before that, it used to be called Microban Plus. Okay, you can get this at Airgas. Does everybody know what an Airgas place is? It's a nationwide company that sells industrial type cleaners and stuff. Or you can get stuff like this at ZEP, Z-E-P, JohnDon.com. Any place that sells janitorial equipment or janitorial supplies will have Mediclean or one of these. That's what is approved for mold remediation to end up killing it. Okay? Now
What was
here.
the first name you mentioned, first name of the company, before that?
Oh, Airgas?
Airgas.
Yep, AIR-GAS, Airgas. And, you're looking for a product that's sometimes, the name brand is Shockwave, sometimes the name brand is Mediclean, and sometimes it's called Microban Plus. And if you don't have something like that, or you just want to end up getting something to where you know where it's at, you can go to Home Depot and get something called Concrobium Mold Control. It's in the paint department. Concrobium, Concrobium. And then in big letters it says mold control.
That just controls it, doesn't kill it.
What I do first, and David knows that the EPA does not approve this, but what I do is I go in with a pump up sprayer, just one of those garden sprayers, and I'll spray everything down with bleach, 100% bleach. Now, do not ever buy, unless it's for your laundry, low splash or no splash bleach, okay? Make sure that you never buy no splash or low splash bleach, because it's too thick to spray through any of your sprayers, okay? You want just the regular laundry bleach. It doesn't have to be outdoor, it doesn't have to be special. It's just, I go to Walmart to get great value bleach, but I make sure it does not say low splash, because if you use the low splash, it's thick like syrup.
Yeah.
And so it won't spray through a pump-up sprayer. And it's really hard to spray through even like a paint sprayer type thing, because it's a little bit thicker than a lot of paints, okay? So I end up always making sure just to get regular chlorine bleach. And that works out real good. I'll spray it with bleach, and that will make the physical appearance of it disappear, but it might turn it into a white dust, and you can sponge that down, and then I go over it with the Microban Plus, Concrobium, or the Mediclean, whatever it is, that kills the roots. Because just use bleach. Bleach kills it on the surface, but mold has roots and it will come back unless you kill it. So you can remove it with all these temporary products that you buy at the grocery store, but unless you kill it, then it's gonna come back. Alright, so go ahead.
These products, I mean, should I recommend these to my wife for
Yeah,
the shower? I mean, would they,
well, you know,
with cleaning the shower or?
in the shower, basically what we do is we just use regular bathroom products and everything and spray them in there. What we're talking about is for like in crawl spaces where mold is on the wood, it's underneath the crawl space, or it's climbing up the concrete cinder blocks, or, you know, it's on the walls or something like that. If it's just on your tile and stuff like that, then any old, bleach product, including bleach itself, is okay. Just put a little squeeze sprayer and actually spray that you get at the dollar store. And stuff like that, you can do 50-50 bleach and water, and it's fine. But, I'll tell you the safest thing that you can use, and now they're starting to end up making this to where mold remediation companies do it. You can get 3% hydrogen peroxide at any grocery store, any store that sells anything has the regular 3% peroxide, okay? Well, people go, well, so you're spraying that on the mold? Yes, it kills mold, and it's cheap. And people go, well, do you have to wear any special equipment or anything? Is it gonna hurt you? No, because how many times have you heard that if you have some sort of mouth infection or something, that you can gargle with hydrogen peroxide? You can actually put it in your mouth and rinse your mouth out. Okay, so they have it now to where if you go to Zep or janitorial supplies, you can buy it in 5-gallon buckets, you can buy it in 55-gallon drums, and stuff like that. And they have it to where if you are a mold remediation company, then you can get it to where it's 35% hydrogen peroxide instead of just 3%. But most people are using 3% hydrogen peroxide, and if they don't buy one of these $250 foggers, then they go and rent one from Home Depot for $14 a half a day, and end up just going in and fogging the areas that they wanna do with this hydrogen peroxide. So, yes.
It's also what they use for COVID cleanup,
Yeah, it'll end up doing
some of the flu virus.
Alright, so, one of the other things is that poorly draining condensate drain pans inside the air handling units, porous liners inside ductwork, and the backside of drywall, always the underside of carpets and stuff like that. Damp air can provide enough, moisture, just like I said, you know, using just basically boiling water on a stove and everything, then you'll end up finding mold above the stove and everything just from that. Appliances such as your dryer, they generate hot moisture and everything, so if it's not sent to the outside of the house, then it can end up causing problems. Alright, the HVAC or the heating and air conditioning systems, that's how mold gets spread throughout the entire house. So if you test positive in the kitchen, you're gonna test positive in the bedroom. So, because it's blowing the same air and it's recirculating the air through the whole house. So, when people end up saying, okay, Pete, so you said that it's $40 for every cartridge that you send to ProLab. So, do I need to end up testing you said test in the kitchen because that's the most expensive place to rehab. Okay, so what if I did one in the kitchen and one in the bathroom and one in the crawl space? Well, you're gonna spend $120 on a test that you could charge $250 to $300 for. So you're actually wasting your time, because if it's gonna test positive in one place, it's gonna test positive in the other, okay? it's just that simple. If you're drinking chocolate milk, it doesn't matter if you spill some in each room. If it's chocolate milk, it's gonna be in every room. You follow me? So all you're doing is you're wasting money. You end up having one test that proves that it's bad, one test that proves that it's better. Okay? You're not gonna get a 100% clean test. You'll never get a 0, 0, 0. So that's why they only have two ways that it comes, elevated and non-elevated. Okay? Because they can't really end up saying what's bad and what's good. They can just say that elevated, you obviously want to stay away from elevated, and the less elevated or non-elevated is the better way to go. Alright, so mold growing in the HVA ducts can spread throughout the house and must be resolved quickly. Clean ducts if mold is growing on hard surfaces and sheet metal. Remove and replace insulation on any inside of air ducts that have gotten wet and moldy. So David knows that if insulation or ductwork is wet and moldy, you should replace it. Okay? If it's wet and moldy, then you should replace it. David knows that. Alright, if you do have a moisture problem from the HVAC, you need to repair the leaks, remove any standing water under the cooling coils, and make sure the drain pans slide toward the drains and that they flow freely. Seal and insulate all air ducts in non-air conditioned spaces, and make sure that carpets, drapes, and furniture are dried promptly after cleaning. I'm going to give you a timeline on that in just a minute. Mold gradually destroys whatever it grows on, and structural damage can result. Mold growth from a roof leak can weaken floors and walls, and that makes it unsafe to enter the property. Okay, so there's mold in this room and everything. Obviously, I told you that it would test positive in any room that you do. It's going to test positive. That's why this is one of the biggest things, and this is why I don't understand why every real estate investor in the whole world is not taking this class, because for the cost of the class, which mine is less than half of what you, if you Google it, what everybody else is doing. But the thing is that every single property is going to test positive. There's not one that's not going to test positive for it. And look up there at that vent right there. You see the mold all around it? Okay, so you want to try and tell me that there's not mold in this room? Okay, so, but are any of us having symptoms about it? No. And the other thing is turn around and look right there where that red dot is. That's where condensation builds up. Okay, because this one blows out. Okay, that one blows out. This one sucks the air back in. So from here to here, then there's a condensation problem. Okay, so it's in every room. That's why it's so ridiculous to me that people don't do this, because it's guaranteed to get you a discount. If it doesn't get you a discount on one property, it's going to get it to you on the next, because there are going to be some banks that end up saying, we don't care. You know, we just don't care. Like Wells Fargo might not give a crap and everything, because they think, well, we're so big, you know, eventually we'll do something. But, you know, I mean, if you're in one of these smaller towns and everything, and I always buy on the outskirts now, okay, because I've got less competition buying on the outskirts of bigger areas, and the properties are normally less expensive. Okay, so I just think that it works out well, and then you're going to be dealing with smaller banks and everything, and smaller mortgage companies and stuff like that. So it's just a no-brainer to me.
And is this applicable only for North Carolina, or is, once we get certified, can we do
It's
for?
nationwide.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing that you have to do is, depending on what state you're in, some states require you, if you're charging money for it and you're doing it as a business, you have to have Some places you don't, like, a lot of people don't know that in some places you don't have to have a license, a business license to paint houses and stuff like that. You know, it's just not regulated in some of the places because they figure just about anybody can paint. But there are places that if you charge money for it, then they want to get the revenue and everything. So, as long as you're not charging money for it, then you don't have to have a license for this. But if you have an LLC and you end up providing services, then you can add this as a service that you provide. Okay, so, basically what I did is I didn't go actually get a business license to do mold inspection. I just added mold inspection to my LLC in a broad spectrum of what my companies do. Okay, so. Alright, so it just, once again, they're repeating themselves that, you know, you could end up weakening the floors and stuff like that. How many times have y'all remember seeing these cartoons to where somebody's in the bathtub and you see the bathtub go through 3 floors? You know, I mean, that's just a visual example for everybody. So, you know, if there's been a leak underneath that bathtub or underneath a toilet because the wax ring has been out, even though you can't see under the tile that the wood's rotted, I've seen instances where people have sat on the toilet and the toilet, the plywood that was supporting the toilet gave out, and they obviously didn't fall through 3 stories like they do on the cartoons, but it did end up crashing through the floor at least a little bit, you know. So that's just because of rotted wood. Now, relative humidity is high in crawl spaces, especially in where there's bare earth floors. So soil will move moisture from wet and dry areas, and relative warmth will evaporate moisture into the air. That's how come it ends up going through the heating vents and air conditioning vents. If you have any pooled water underneath any crawl space or any property that you have, make sure to end up getting a wet and dry shop vac in there, suck that stuff out, or hire somebody to do it, and then end up putting some blowers or some heaters in there until you dry the place out and everything. Because remember, every time that your heater or air conditioner turns on, then you hear this whoosh. What it is, it's pulling the air from all the empty space areas in between the walls, in between the crawl spaces, in between the attic areas, and it's whooshing that air through the circulated area. And that's why it floats through the air and it lands on something and it grows. Alright, now David knows this. Anything that gets wet, you need to have it dry between 24 and 48 hours to avoid mold. And David knows that. You have to dry something within 24 to 48 hours. You do that by increasing air circulation and temperature. Commercial firms use large fans, dehumidifiers, and stuff before mold has a chance to grow. Alright, so if you take action, then it will save money in the long run because no remediation work is required, and David knows that. If you take action within 24 to 48 hours, then no remediation work is required, and David knows this. So 24 to 48 hours will save money in the long run because no remediation work is needed. Alright, now we're gonna talk about floods because y'all have had floods, okay? Right? All floods must remove contaminated materials and reduce moisture, humidity. Standing water and wet materials are breeding ground for microorganisms. Viruses, bacteria, and mold can be ended up growing from this, and it can cause disease, trigger allergic reactions, and continue to damage materials. Anytime that you have flood waters, then it has to be done by a professional. So it's not something that we do. We're doing mold inspection. And you know that if the difference between flood waters is not water that started inside the house and worked its way out. This is water that started outside the house and worked its way in. That's how an insurance company would describe a flood water. Flood water is dirty, contaminated water that started on the outside of the house and moved in. There's no such thing as they consider a flood to where it started inside the house and then went out. That's considered a backup or something like that, but floods are catastrophes that actually end up coming from out there. All right, so you want to investigate moist, damp, wet spots and everything, which means carpet, paneling, and drywall. Mold does not need light to grow. It can grow on the backside of drywall, wallpaper, paneling, tops of ceiling tiles, underside of carpets, pads, behind walls and in crawl spaces. And a lot of times it's in utility tunnels and pipe chases and liners around. Now, see these roof tiles up here? That's called porous materials or cellulose. And David knows this. If it is wet and it's a porous or a cellulose material, then it must be discarded and replaced. If it's porous or cellulose material and it has mold on it, it must be discarded and replaced. And yes, that right there. You see that right up there? That right there is not a toxic mold in my opinion. Obviously, I haven't tested it, but based on my 25 years of experience, that is not a toxic mold. However, if I wanted to end up being 100% correct, I would replace those. Now, could I end up treating them with Metaclean? Of course. Would it kill the mold? Yes, it would. But the thing is that if it's porous or cellulose material, will I actually be able to get inside all of that fiber that's in there and kill everything that's in there, or would it continue to grow? So if it's a porous material or it's cellulose material, like a ceiling tile, and it's a small area like that, obviously if I said that a porous material, if it was a concrete cinder block, I would not get rid of the concrete cinder block because it can't go further than the holes that are in there. But this, it can be damp all the way through. So, and unless you're ended up treating all sides of it, then that needs to be replaced. Porous or cellulose, remember those words.
So, let's say that you have a house, it's not going through the mold remediation deal, and you're gonna sell it.
Yep,
So, you could treat it or remove it,
right.
but after you treated it, would you hit it with like kills or shellac or something like that?
If
and paint?
I was gonna end up just, if I was flipping the house, and not renting it, to where I knew that it was gonna be my problem again later down the road, then what I would do is I would end up spraying that with bleach, Microvan Plus, or whatever the other ones that kill it, and then I would, end up having the ceiling painted, and I would do, kills or any type of the oil-based primers, okay? I never use latex primers, and the reason being is because latex primers, you will have mold growth come back through a latex primer. And anytime that you end up using a primer, you need to end up doing this. It needs to have the word sealer / primer. Never use a primer that does not say sealer - primer, because if it doesn't seal, it will come through. And 99% of the properties that are, that you end up using a latex primer does not say the word sealer in it, okay? Now, shellac is a good thing to end up doing because that seals it too. But when you paint over shellac, it stays shiny and it takes 3.5 or 4 hours more time to dry than the regular paint. So you see this shiny spot and you go, oh my God, is that gonna end up turning out to look right afterwards? But see, shellac used to be the thing that you'd use.
You can't use latex on the oil primer, can you?
Yes, yeah, you can use latex paint over an oil primer, but you can't use oil-based paint over a latex primer. See, you can always put oil over latex, but you can't put latex over oil unless it's an oil primer. Okay, that's the rule. Okay, now, this is the machine that I have over there, and the green light's gone off again. So it's either charged or it's just having a rough time over there. But, when we're doing, mold investigation, then it may require professional expertise. Well, you're gonna be the experts, because we are taking the course to become experts. Right, specialized techniques and equipment. I don't use a borescope. A borescope is something that you end up drilling a hole in the wall and you stick it through there. Y'all have seen like SWAT and all the TV shows, to where they drill a hole and they stick a little thing in there, and it's a little camera that twists around and look at everybody. That's a borescope, okay? I don't think that for what we do, that's not what we need to do. As a matter of fact, if I end up seeing to where there's mold and it's growing up off of the floor like this, if it looks like it's growing up on the wall and it doesn't look toxic to me, which I've shown you the difference, then what I'll do is I'll take a doorknob hole cutter. Does everybody know what one of those is? It's a round thing that goes on a drill. And I will end up going about this high above the baseboard, and I will, every so often, I will end up drilling one of those things out, and I'll look on the back of it to see if there's mold on the back of this drywall. If there's mold on the back of the drywall when it comes up 2 feet, and I end up going across 3 or 4 places on that whole wall, and I have mold on the back of each one, then I will end up taking a chalk line, and I'll measure up 4 feet on one side of the wall and 4 feet on the other side, and pop a line, because then I can replace the drywall by laying it sideways, and it'll take 3 pieces as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You follow me on that? Okay, so because it can only suck the water up so high before it doesn't have any more sucking power. So that's why I don't worry if something ends up flooding on the inside of a house and it gets under the baseboards. It can only suck up the drywall so far. See, most people replace the whole piece of drywall all the way across, and they will end up ripping out the whole room if it does that all the way around. What I'll do is I will end up knocking out the bottom 4 feet, knowing that it'll only climb 2 feet at the most, and then if I replace the bottom 4 feet all the way around, then I have saved literally 60 to 70% of the rehab cost in the room, because I didn't have to replace the top. Okay, so that's just that's a general contractor tip there. All right, so moisture meters, we always use moisture meters, which is down here. You rub it across and it tells you what the moisture is. But I end up using one of these. This is an infrared thermometer. All right, what I do is I take one of these in houses with me. Every time that I go into a house, what I'll do is I'll walk in, and if I suspect mold in the place, I will end up going to the place where I smell the musty odor, and I'm hoping that it's gonna be in the kitchen and everything. But if I want to pinpoint where I've got to replace stuff, then what I'll do is I'll point this at the wall, and it will end up giving me a reading. And then whatever the reading is on this, if it says that it's 70 degrees, then I will wait 15 seconds for it to reset. And then I will come to the next wall, and I will hit the next wall. And then if it says 70 degrees, I'm great. If I end up going to this wall and it says 64 degrees, I know that I need to investigate that wall. Because any place that it's colder than the other places is got wetness, okay? So that's what this is for. It's just a quick, easy way. The other thing I use these for is if I wanna make sure that when I'm inspecting a house, whether the heating and air conditioning works, I turn the heater on when I first go in there, and then I'll end up taking a vent and I'll shoot this, and it'll tell me what the temperature is that it's blowing out. I'll know whether it's heating. Then I'll go switch it to air conditioning. I'll wait about 5 minutes so that it gets the warm air out. Then I'll end up shooting this at one of the vents and everything, and it'll tell me what the air conditioning's blowing out at. So now I know, you know, if it's doing pretty good. The other thing is I can end up turning on the hot water, and I'll feel the water when it gets hot to my hand, and then once it gets to where it's hot enough, then I will end up pulling the drain stop and let it fill up to a certain point, then I'll turn it off. I'll shoot this into the water, and it'll tell me what the temperature is, so I can see whether the heating element is working on the water heater, okay? Because if it just gets warm and I had let it run for a reasonable amount of time to where that should be hot water, then it's either the temperature's turned down way too low, or I end up knowing that it needs a new heating element. A lot of people don't, these are just little things that are general contractor things that people don't think about. So, you know, it's the little things that you don't think about that make the difference between whether you find certain things and when you don't. You know, it's, everybody can teach you the basics. It's the things that people don't look for is what makes education the best, you know?
The golden nuggets.
Yes. So, anyway, disturbing a moldy area can spread mold and everything. David knows that. Anytime that you disturb a moldy area, it can spread mold. Opening and closing, air handlers can send mold into the air. And, basically, we're gonna start talking about equipment. All right, the equipment that we normally use when we go and look at houses is I carry a flashlight. I don't carry a borescope. I do carry a moisture meter. You can get these at Harbor Freight for $19. Made by a company called General or something called Ames or something like that. I use what's called a pinless moisture meter. Okay, if you get something cheap because it's under $10, then it's called a pinned moisture meter, and it's got 2 nails that come out, and you poke it into carpet, you poke it into drywall, you poke it into whatever, and if it detects water, then it tells you. I use what's called pinless moisture meters. That's something that, and it'll show you one in a minute. I normally have one with me, but it's packed and stuff in the car. But you end up putting this on the actual surface. It doesn't matter if it's brick, stucco, drywall, carpet, cinder block, anything. It shoots down within 3 feet. And it will end up telling you the amount of moisture that's in there. It will either be green, yellow, or red. And it'll tell you the percentage of moisture that's in there. 100% means it's wet, okay? And it'll go beep, 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 and it'll be all red and everything. And it ends up helping you control the drying process. You can monitor the drying process. So if I put a moisture meter on something and it says that it's 90% wet and it's red and beeping, I can put fans or heaters on it, come back an hour later. If it's in the yellow and it's at 70% moisture, then I know that I'm monitoring the drying process. And I will know that if I can get it into the green within 24 to 48 hours, then no mold remediation is gonna be necessary, okay? That's something that David knows, that a moisture meter can monitor the drying process.
Can you tell me the name again, of that part of it? The 2-pin, what is the name of that
Oh,
part?
General makes one, see this name brand right here, General makes one.
I remember that.
No, we can, you know what, why don't we take a break? Let's go ahead and take a break, because this